Hello, everybody. Galatin here. We'll be looking at performance management, and the objective of this video is to introduce ourselves to strategic management under performance management. Introduce ourselves to strategic planning and control, strategic objectives, and levels of management. Basically, we are introducing ourselves to performance management. So under the above mention, we'll be splitting it also into the definition of strategic planning and controls, the usefulness and purposes of management accounting, that is planning, control, decision making, levels of strategic planning will be looked at. Then we'll look at the processes in strategic planning. Then what is strategic objectives? Then we will break it down also, looking at planning and corporate objectives, who should be responsible for the objective, for corporate objectives precisely, and planning, the need for the performance measurement, and management accounting, its usefulness and performance measurement. Then we will look at levels of management under performance management. Now we'll be talking about the strategic, the tactical, and the operational levels of management. Then we'll go on to look at the potential conflicts that could arise between the strategic planning and the short-term planning and how we can resolve it. After this topic, then we'll be looking at the overview of cost planning and control, like the high and low method, the linear regression analysis, and the like. Those are the things that we'll be looking at after this video. So we welcome you all as we go into the class right away. So if you are just joining us in Ginger's Associates, please, we would like you to subscribe to Ginger's Associates channel. Let us build this community together. Like us, click the subscription and notification button, comments, and the like, so that we can build this community together. Let us go right away into the discourse for the day. So, planning and control. How can we define planning, strategic planning precisely? We can say planning is identification of strategic goals. Identification of strategic goals with the aim of working to its attainment and achieving it, the goal and objective of the entity. That is strategic planning. And this planning, this identification of goals and objectives of an organization actually must be handled by the apex authority of an organization. So we are talking about the board of director here. We are talking about the the shareholder and the forerunner of the organization. That is those that conceive and give birth. We call them founder or founders of an organization. So they must identify the goal of an organization and its objectives. And when we're talking about goals and objectives, goals basically must be written down. Of course, objectives too must be written down. But when we are talking about objectives, objectives are, are measurable. Objectives are measurable. Don't forget we are talking about performance management. Objectives must be measurable. So we must have KPI, key performance indicator. It must be broken down into pieces, measurable pieces. It must be achievable. It must be written down. So that is an objective, and that makes it to be different from aim. Aim, aim or aims are usually in narrative, but objectives must be quantified. They must be measurable. When we're talking about the definition of strategic planning too, we must be looking at planning strategy for the organization that will enable us to achieve that goal. When we're talking about planning strategically, we must be talking about the strategy also. As we are aiming at a goal, then we must be strategizing. What, how do we want to achieve it? And don't forget, especially people that have studied corporate strategic management, know that at the heart and at the center of strategy is competitiveness, is survival in the competitive industry, in the marketplace. So now that we plan and have a goal and we've turned into a measurable key performance indicator objectives, then plan also must take into consideration how to achieve it, competitiveness, strategic capability. So strategy must be planned for too. So when we are defining strategic planning, we must define plan, which we say is a goal, an aim, and objective of the organization. And the strategy aspect of it is how are we going to win the race? How are we going to achieve our goals and objectives? So the definition of strategy also must cover setting targets, measurable targets for each strategic objective. We must be able to nail it on the head. It must be time bound. Also, converting strategy into short-term operational plans. Don't forget when I started, I said when we are talking about strategic planning, it takes place at the apex hierarchy of an organization. So they must equally be able to break it down to operational plan and the management, that is people that run the organization on a daily basis, must be able to take it over from the level of corporate level and corporate planning to the level of operational plan. So when we are talking about strategic planning too, we must plan for implementation. How do we want the strategic objective, strategic plan, strategic aim to be achieved? Who and who are to achieve it? So we must be able to plan for it and put it in our corporate plan. So how do we want the organogram of an organization or of the organization to look like? So how do we want the corporate strategic planning to spiral down? So this will indicate the implementation of strategy. And still on definition of strategic planning and control, let us take the aspect of strategic control too. So when we are talking about control, we are talking about the monitoring of the actual and comparing our actual strategic plan with the strategic budget what we achieve against what we planned to achieve. So that is basically control. So the monitoring aspect of our strategic plan, that is control. When we're talking about the definition of strategic control, we'll be talking about measures where appropriate when actual performance is below the target. So when we find ourselves or a department, a function, an HOD and the like, a management staff, an executive director, and CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the organization, falling short of the corporate strategic plan. So we must be able to have measures in place to address it also. It's part of what must be planned for. And we need to plan for all these things even before the organization move into force. That is, becomes more operational. Because if we do not do this, it's going to take a lot of energy and back and forth, which an organization does not really need, and it's not that beneficial. It's a waste of executive time. So we must plan for all these things from the onset as we are giving birth to a new organization. Many organizations in reality will not do this, and they will leave it to chance. As things unfold, they begin to react to it. But a corporate organization actually should be led proactively. And before we move on from this definition, it's important to let us know that plan, whether corporate planning, strategic planning, operational planning, we must ensure that it's equally flexible. It must not be too rigid. It must be dynamic in nature. It must be dynamic in nature, because if it's not dynamic in nature, at the end of the day, the rigidity will affect the performance of the organization, because different thing in our environment is going to change. The landscape may change. Don't forget that we are talking about strategic long-term planning and control. So a lot of unforeseeable circumstances, even in the nation, in the country we operate from, in the industry we operate from, they are going to change, which we may not before have envisaged. So we must be able to react to them. So it is important that under strategic planning too, we must be able to assess strategically, and if possible, changes must take place. So a plan must allow for reassessment, evaluation, and changes if it's actually required. Having defined what strategic planning and control is, performance management has many sides, which we've discussed in the previous video. I'm going to send the link, attach the link to this video, so for those that are not part of us then or have not watched it too. So management accounting is key aspect of performance management. Management accounting is key when we are discussing performance management. And so let us look at what management accounting really is and its purposes, and how we can incorporate it into performance management as a discourse. So the purpose of management accounting actually is to provide the relevant and reliable information. Let me come again. The purpose of management accounting is to provide relevant and reliable information to support management in decision making. Performance management to support management in decision making. So management accounting is critical. Provision of relevant, timely information is key, and that is what management accounting will give us when we are talking about performance management. We cannot manage our performance if we are not strong on the management accounting side. Basically, the purpose or the purposes of management accounting to performance management is to help in planning, to provide information, relevant information precisely for us to be able to plan ahead, also to be able to control and to be able to take proactive decision making. So we are not going to waste much time about the purposes of management accounting. So far we've dealt with planning, we've dealt with control. Maybe I should talk a bit on decision making before we move on. Then that's the only side that we've not talked about. Decision making basically is based on relevant information, and decision making spirals down the hierarchy of any organization. So there are corporate strategic decision making, that is decision making that are only unique and must be made by the board of directors. Also, there are decisions that must be made by the management, and there are decisions that must be made by the operational and functional level of management. So at every level, decisions must be made, and individuals in the organization must be given both the responsibility and the authority commensurate to their level to make different decisions at different times. So what are the levels of strategic plan or strategic planning? So basically, we can say there are three levels of strategic planning. There are three levels of strategic planning. So we'll be talking about the strategic plan itself. We'll be talking about the uniqueness of tactical planning, and we'll be talking about the importance and relevance of operational planning. So when we are talking about corporate planning, we'll be talking about the strategic planning, we'll be talking about the tactical planning, and we'll be talking about the operational plan. So let us break them down one after the other. Strategic planning, now we are getting used to it. We said must be made by the apex authority within an organization, like the board of directors or the founder of the organization. They must have strategic plan, that is long-term plan. It is usually long, that is at least it must be looking forward to 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Strategic plan can go as long as 100 years. That is strategic planning, but it cannot be less than 5 years when we're talking about strategic planning. When we're talking about tactical planning, from that word it indicates a short term or short term period of time. So the length of time it's looked at, 5 years and below. 5 years and below. That is tactical plan. Is short term plan for achieving medium term objectives, and like setting an annual budget and the like. That's a tactical plan and how to achieve it. An operational plan. An operational plan is a daily activity. It's a, it's a plan for different activities, supervisory activities that routinely managers and their subordinates must take. So operational planning is an operational matter. So it covers weeks, months, daily occurrences, and the like. Like a supervisor might divide the workload between several employees in order to complete all the work before the end of the day. So that is operational planning. Planning to achieve a bit of the tactical which leads us to our corporate goal. That is operational planning. And at operational level, it suffices me to say that almost everybody in the organization will be involved one way or the other making operational planning decision. Almost everybody in any organization will make operational plan. Let us now go to strategic planning process, and let me now show us how strategic planning process should look like. Let me show us the diagram right away. So can we see it? This is what strategic planning process or strategic planning processes must look like. That word I use, must look like. So the apex authority within an entity must make strategic plan and primarily must set objectives. Having set objectives, they must analyze the strategic analysis of their position, of their choices, of the objectives, of the aims, of the goals, of the KPIs, of the strategy, competitiveness, of the strategic capability. So they must analyze after they've set the objective, then they must make strategic choices. And what are strategic choices? It simply means answering some difficult questions like which industry do we want to go into and what products do we want to produce, which markets, which niche do we want to have, which customer, which clients do we want to serve. Those are strategic choices. Which location do we want to operate from? And having strategized and developed their choices, evaluation must take place of the strategy. They must evaluate their strategies and let the planning process spiral down to the management, and they must check the implementation of the strategies at the tactical level. And having set the objective, analyze it, make choices, evaluate it, ensure implementation takes place, they must frequently review. They must review the workability, the effectiveness, the efficiency of the strategic planning of the choices and the results. And like I said, planning must be flexible. So if it requires changes, they must quickly address all this. And if it does not, good. So then they ensure that they move forward and proceed. So let us quickly go into it in details. Planning. They must plan and have visibility study. An organization should have visibility study from the onset to ensure how viable the business eventually will be, and like project management ensure we do that. So strategic analysis, as we begin to execute, we must begin to analyze. Is it working? Where is it not working? Where are we spending above? Who should be around that have not joined us? We need to reach out to those people in form of employee recruitment and the like. Implementation. We need to buckle down on managers, HODs, executive directors, independent directors, non-executive directors. Everybody must do his or her job, and at the end of the day, we ensure compliance to governmental and regulatory agencies and ensure we review on as frequent as is practicable. So let us move on to the next subtopic, strategic objectives. So we'll be looking at strategic objectives. You will agree with me that if we don't plan, we are actually planning. Anybody that does not plan is actually still planning. It's just that the person may be planning to fail, which is not good enough. So it is good that every life should plan. Also, in a corporate life, there must be planning. And when we are talking about planning, we are planning towards our objectives. So we are talking about strategic objectives now, corporate objectives. So when we are talking about corporate objectives, we are talking about the purposes, achieving the purposes of our existence as an organization. Why are we in existence? Why do we form this organization? Strategic objective will address that question. Why do we form this organization? Okay, let's say for example, our corporate objective is to ensure we produce and make affordable products, a specific products to a specific target of the market. That's an objective. Then it must become measurable. What number, which year do we want to achieve that or make that possible? Who and who do we need? What level of knowledge must they come in with to the organization? How are we going to measure their performance? What will be the criteria? Who will be responsible for the performance measurements of the objective? Like the chairman of the board, the CEO, chief executive officer. So all these must be incorporated in planning and the breaking down of our corporate purposes into corporate objectives, which must be measurable. So when we are talking about the need for performance measurement is critical in the life of any organization because if we do not evaluate our proposal, our goal, our plan, whether we are achieving it or not. And if we are achieving it, how are we achieving it? Are we that efficient in achieving it or we are not? And when do we achieve it on time, even before the set date or the set year, or we achieve it later? And if we achieve it later, how later or how soon? So these are the questions that performance measurements must be asking, and the need for performance measurement is critical to ensure that we are on the right track always, and to ensure that everybody is performing their role that will lead the organization corporately to its objective and fulfilling its mission, its vision, its objectives. So the need for performance measurement is critical. An organization is going to benefit immensely when we put performance measurement in place. Well-structured system of performance measurements to ensure clarity in our objectives. The workbook group, various function, individuals in the organization must contribute their own quota. So it helps us to ensure that everybody is performing. It establishes agreed measures of activity based on key success factors. And when we are talking about key success factor, what are we actually talking about? We are talking about things that will help us, that will give us an edge, unique privileges, which later we develop into strategic capability. So that is what we are talking about when we are talking about success factor. And if we have success factors as an organization, we must utilize them. And it is performance measurement that will help us to ensure that we maximize our strategic capability in the area of available success factors. Also, organization will benefit when we have a well-structured performance measurement system in place. It provides a system of comparing our performance against the organization or departmental actuals results. It establishes targets for the organization's manager over a suitable period of time. So the managers, the executives, they know what the organization expects from them, and they must go for it. So performance measurement ensures that the organization receives value for money, money in form of services that we've paid for to our vendors, remuneration of the directors, staff salaries, governmental agency payments to them, and the like. All this, we must receive value for it, and performance management will give us this when we build a suitable, workable system of performance management within an organization system. Management accounting and performance measurement. Management accounting actually is key to performance management because management accounting feeds into performance measurement and performance management in form of relevant information. If performance management and performance measurement does not have or receive timely relevant information from management accounting, there's nothing to measure on. Performance measurements will not function because we need information from management accounting. So management accounting is key because it's a support for performance measurements. So we cannot but talk about management accounting when we're talking about performance measurements. They are interrelated, coupled with some other relevant disciplines and courses that we've spoken about in earlier video. The link will be sent here. So having said that, let us proceed to the next subtopic, which is levels of management. Levels of management. So just like levels of strategic planning, also we have levels of management, which is tactical, strategic, and could be operational. So levels of management could be strategic, tactical, and operational, or we say operational, tactical, and strategic. So the same way we look at levels of planning, the same way it is when we are talking about levels of management. On the strategic level, we're talking about the board of directors, we're talking about the founders of the organization. Those are at the strategic level. Then we'll be talking about the tactical. When we're talking about the tactical, we're talking about the executives. That is the management, top executive of the organization that make the tactical decision. Then when we're talking about the operational, we're talking about the functional heads of the organization, like the managers and the like. So basically, these are the levels of management in any organization. So let us look at conflicts that usually will arise when we are talking about an organization, especially as it concerns its performance management and its general management. There will always be potential conflicts between the strategic plan or the strategic planners and the short-term plan of the organization or the short-term planners. Where am I putting her? I'm putting her because the plan must be made by human being. I hope you agree with me. So, and basically, the issue of conflict, majority of the time, will arise as a result of self-interest. Maybe I should come again. I'm trying to summarize everything. Potential conflicts between strategic planning and short-term planning will usually arise fundamentally as a result of self-interest. When an employee, when an executive wants to ensure that he or she delivers as organization expects of him or her, especially which may be the basis of reward, it can jeopardize, majority of the time will jeopardize the long-term objective or plan of the organization. Let us take a look at an example. Let's say the short-term plan of an organization is to ensure, let's say this year, we want to make 1 billion in whatever currency. 1 billion in whatsoever currency as turnover. And a manager is like, okay, if we are able to have 1 billion turnover this year, 10% of it goes back to probably the sales manager or people in charge that have made that one to happen. So that is short-term plan. Don't forget that as we made huge sales, we are going to have huge bottom line in form of profitability, especially when expenses are well managed. So we made employee collect their own reward. But if care is not taken, the long-term plan, which is the survival of the organization, may be at jeopardy. Because the question now is, we hit the target, but at what cost and at whose expense? At what cost? At whose expense? So potential conflicts usually arise as a result of this question not answered. At what cost? At whose expense was the cost made? We can hit the target, but with higher cost. And the short-term planners, the operational managers and the like, will have ensured they have their reward, because in the first place they are working towards their reward. So how can organization manage this performance, especially this area of conflict? We must ensure we tie the short-term reward of employee, whether executive, whether tactical managers and like operational manager. We must ensure we tie both the current or short-term reward or from our short-term plan against and directly to strategic plan. We must ensure that our reward always in the short term always lead us to long-term objective being achieved. This is a practical aspect of performance management, and it requires a lot of knowledge and exposure practice. And this is a topic for the board of directors. This is coming in a syllabus, which is very good. That's why it comes as an introduction, but it's deeper than that. It's a skill. Managing the potential conflict between strategic plan and short-term plan is actually a skill. So far you stayed with us. We thank you. If you are yet to subscribe to GJ's Associate, please click the subscription button right away, notification button right away. Let us build this community together. I want to believe you must have enjoyed the lectures. Next, we are going to be meeting and discussing the overview of cost planning and control, and we'll be looking at performance management information and where can we find our performance management information, that is sources of performance management information. Then we'll look at the high and low methods. We will look at linear regression analysis, marginal costing and absorption costing, their advantages, their disadvantages, and when are they applicable. We will look at ABC, not the ABC of the alphabet, is activity-based costing, APC, activity-based costing. Then we'll be looking at ethics of performance management, ethics of performance management. My name is Benga Latinji from G. James Associates. We are value to your life. We are value to businesses.